Tonight, Mary Pickford, Hollywood's first movie star.
You become entranced by her.
She became the most famous woman in the world. Why was she nearly forgotten?
I think she felt she was a victim in being betrayed by the public that she had given everything to.
Hi and welcome. I'm Anne-Marie MacDonald. Mary Pickford was America's sweetheart, the queen of the silent screen. Most of us recognize her as the face of her era. Rosebud lips, ringlets, and those big gammon eyes. But she was way more than an eternal ingenue. She revolutionized screen acting. She stood up to the studio bosses, then became one. Beneath the adorable ringlets was a spine of steel. One that had been tempered in a hard Toronto childhood. How did little Gladys Smith from Toronto become Mary Pickford, the most famous human being in the world?
This film, My Best Girl, starred the most famous, fabulously wealthy woman since Cleopatra. Mary Pickford was born in Toronto in 1892. But it was as America's sweetheart that she became the most famous person who ever lived. Pickford was once a muse for D.W. Griffith, a rival for Chaplin, an icon for Einstein. But she died virtually forgotten. She tried to burn all her films, and with them, her legacy. Stories of the rise and fall of screen legends are as familiar as the skyline here. But until Pickford, there was no such thing as a movie star. No such thing as a celebrity feeding frenzy. No such thing as a private life lived in front of the camera. As much by accident as design, Mary Pickford created the landscape upon which all celebrities walk.
We live in an age of celebrity. Some poor little housewife in Saskatchewan or Montana, wants to be Julia Roberts. I mean, everybody's nuts on the celebrity subject. And it all began with Mary.
If Pickford's creative achievement is overshadowed, she, as much as anyone, is responsible. But a growing number of fans want to restore her films and rescue her reputation as one of the century's great actors and producers.
I mean, this is somebody who is so charming, and the camera just loves her so much. What comes across on the screen, I mean, you just fall in love with her. She's so wonderful to watch. You become entranced by her.
The talent of Mary Pickford, the most dynamic, realistic actress of her time, was born of early tragedy. Christened Gladys Smith in Toronto in 1892, she was partially orphaned by the age of 6. Her beloved father, a hard-drinking bon vivant, died in an alcohol-related accident. Her mother collapsed.
Her mother was keening over the body and bashing her own head into the wall, so much that the blood began to gush from her skull through her hair. Mary Pickford came into the room and saw this going on.
From that moment on, the 6-year-old knew that she alone would have to take charge.
She resolved that she wanted to become the father of her own family.
Pickford took on the role of breadwinner. She joined the theater where she worked 15-hour days for little money. The conditions were like any sweatshop. But Pickford didn't complain. This is Mary Pickford in a 1959 CBC radio interview.
I remember it as though it were yesterday, and I just loved it. I don't know where I got this ham blood in me.
As Gladys Smith, she made a name for herself on the Toronto stage, playing poor, fatherless children. Unwittingly, she began a lifetime of autobiographical roles. And at age 15, without as much as a promise or even a letter of introduction, Mary Pickford headed for Broadway and its most successful producer.
She targeted David Belasco, went around to his office in New York demanding to see him, and as usual would be turned away. So she finally walked into his office one day and said in a very loud voice, "My life depends upon seeing David Belasco." And this so much amused everyone that they actually let her in to see the guy. It's like trying to see Steven Spielberg today.
Belasco gave her a new name and a leading role, but he didn't pay her enough to feed her family.
I was 15 years of age, and we needed money, as usual. And Mother, to my great unhappiness and I would say almost annoyance, said to me, what about trying those motion picture studios? I said, "Oh, Mama, not that."
As a business, the movies were considered about as respectable as prostitution. Quick and dirty entertainment for unsavory customers. But Pickford headed for one of film's most prolific outfits, the Biograph Company. The director there was a failed actor named D.W. Griffith, who was cranking out one 8-minute film every day. He paid his actors $5. Mary Pickford got him up to 10 a day. The acting technique of the time was charitably known as semaphore, and Griffith did not discourage it. He particularly encouraged his actresses to use it with abandon.
D.W. Griffith had a weakness for the way that he directed young women. He liked them to be over-girlish, like a frisky puppy, or a rabbit on speed. And Mary Pickford refused to do this.
Mr. Griffith used to argue with me, and I said, "No, sir. It's not natural, and I won't do it." And I since have wondered why he put up with a naughty little girl like I was. But he did.
There is an emotion in those films, and Pickford was one of the best purveyor of that emotion.
According to the preeminent silent film historian Kevin Brownlow, Mary Pickford invented modern screen acting.
You will see her do little realistic details, smoothing a coat or adjusting a hat or doing things which were not necessary and which most of the theatrical players of the time wouldn't have bothered with, but which meant reality to the audience. She came to life in a way that the others didn't.
Biograph had the last thing they wanted, the first movie star. They tried to keep it from her by hiding fan mail, and when the press required names for actors, they lied.
And they thought, well, we're starting anew, let's not mention the names of the players. It will be the company name, like the Ford Motor Company, that people will know and respect, and they won't want, and therefore the actors won't want these ridiculous salaries. Well, of course, it doesn't work like that, and people started talking about the Biograph girl.
Pickford was oblivious to her growing reputation. For one thing, she was distracted by her co-star, Owen Moore. These films echo Pickford's real-life experience with Moore. Pickford did marry Moore when she was 18. He was a charming carouser who reminded her of her father. Unfortunately, there were too many ways he resembled Pickford's father. In this film, as in life, he plays an alcoholic who goes on drinking binges while Pickford's character tries to hold everything together. Pickford's most autobiographical role, Maggie, in My Best Girl, shows Mary's character taking care of her entire family.
I think she needed people to depend on her. And this is what's happening here in this film. She's resenting them, but at the same time, she needed them to need her.
Pickford's real-life brother Jack and sister Lottie were always getting in trouble. Alcoholism plagued the entire family, and it was Mary who dealt with the consequences. In My Best Girl, Maggie's sister ends up in court, just as Mary's own sister Lottie had.
And Lottie, this is Lottie. I mean, Mary spent tons of money keeping Lottie and Jack out of the papers. They were constantly in trouble.
I was the father of the family, and I wanted security for my people. And I didn't know anything but work. But I was terribly ambitious, you see.
She left her new husband behind when she moved the family west in 1913. The motion picture industry was primitive, but she had a sense it wouldn't stay that way.
Imagine that just 80 years ago, it was called a 9 o'clock town. If you fired a cannon down Hollywood Boulevard at 9 o'clock, you wouldn't hit anyone. So it was very sleepy, full of orange groves, lemon groves. The scent must have been wonderful. It was unspoilt.
There were no studios, but if a bird went through a shot, like you might be doing an interior where it's supposed to be a dining room and a bird goes right through the dining room, or the tablecloth is rustling in the wind or whatever, well, no matter, you know. We'll just go ahead. People will understand. It's a movie. We're doing our best. So it was very improvisational. And there was this whole spirit in the air of we don't know what we're doing.
All that would change with one of Mary's first feature films. Shot on the Santa Monica beach, which stood in for the Scottish moors, it is the tale of a spunky young orphan, and it came at the right time. The public was tiring of Victorian propriety. Pickford grabbed their imagination with her defiance of authority figures and her loose ringlets.
Mary Pickford's hair was the crown jewels of film. The symbolism of her hair was a reminder of the first romance between the public and the film industry. It was a public trust.
Tess broke box office records. It spawned a huge movie magazine industry. Audiences became obsessed with its star and everything about her.
Tess the Storm Country was so extraordinarily popular. I like to say that it's as if you had a movie with the Titanic in it and a Tyrannosaurus had checked onto the Titanic. That was the box office power that Mary Pickford established through Tess the Storm Country. And that established the star system in Hollywood.
Mary Pickford was the reason for Tess's box office success, and Mary Pickford knew it. In 1916, she insisted on the astonishing salary of $500,000 a year and total control of her films. She felt if she was in charge, her films would be far better than anything Hollywood had yet seen.
Mary Pickford was the most successful producer that the silent era knew. And that is an enormous claim. Flawless, I think is the word one would use.
At age 24, Pickford was in charge of 6 films a year. Many were based on children's stories. Pickford knew what her audiences wanted, and for a while, she was happy indulging them.
And you can see how much she enjoys it. That she is discovering it often for the first time. The playfulness and the joy of being a child without responsibility, which she never was.
In Daddy Longlegs, Pickford plays another orphan. She seamlessly blends in with the other children. But their average age is 7. Pickford is 25.
What she could do was get under the skin of a child without using the filter of adulthood. She never played a caricature of a child. She addresses so many things that children go through: the loss of parents, being punished for things you didn't do, rebelliousness, how to stand up, how to be impudent, and what happens to you once you've been impudent.
Part of Pickford's skill came from her concern for the vulnerability of children. She depicted child abuse with an honesty that surpassed any other mainstream filmmaker of her time. This film features a slave girl, Unity Blake, who is nearly beaten to death. It's almost relentlessly bleak, and it's considered one of Pickford's best.
One of the first shots of Unity shows her literally against a cross. It's like Christ crucified. It's grim, it's horrifying. She has a twisted little smile on her face, which says, "I am deformed, I can deal with it, can you?" And that's really throwing the gauntlet down.
Unity is unloved and unlovable. It is the grittiest role Pickford ever played.
Mary Pickford was working out some insecurities about herself and her relationship with the public. She wanted the public to tell her, "We love you even when you're not beautiful."
A voracious industry had grown up around Mary Pickford. It was hungry for product, and Pickford was its best-known trademark. She had willingly set a trap for herself, and now she couldn't escape. United Artists studio head Lindsay Doran says Pickford was the first star to be typecast.
I think one of the most touching and even tragic stories is this story about how in 1925 she went to Photoplay magazine and asked their readers what they would like her to play. And here she was, she'd been playing these child women most of her life. She must have been longing for people to write in and say, "Stop that, Mary, we've had it with that. Play Joan of Arc." And instead they wrote back and said, "We want you to play Heidi. We want you to play Anne of Green Gables." It's terribly sad.
With the onset of the First World War, Mary Pickford's mission was clear. She became one of the first actors to use her celebrity to champion a favorite cause.
Mary Pickford loves soldiers, and any boy going off to war could wring her heart like a washcloth. She could tell terrifically embroidered stories about atrocities committed by the Huns. People responded to the fact that it was Mary Pickford standing there in the flesh.
Pickford could raise $5 million for war bond sales in a single afternoon, and even more when she was joined by fellow star Charlie Chaplin and his best friend, film's first action hero, Douglas Fairbanks.
Douglas Fairbanks was not an actor in the regular sense. He was a personality. He just burst out of the screen. Fairbanks was making contact with the audience, and you heard chuckles. He would glance at the audience directly, which you're not supposed to look at the camera, but he immediately caught them in the way that Pickford caught them.
And he immediately caught Pickford. He would become the love of her life.
Oh, he was a wonderful person. You would have loved him. He was a little boy always, and he was just in life as he was on the screen. He'd have you out there on the lawn or up there. You know, there's a water tower up there. He'd probably in the next hour have you up climbing that. He was like an arrow in full flight.
They were desperate to be together, but technically she still had a husband, and Mary Pickford was a symbol of virtue.
Good women did not get divorced. She seriously believed that she would lose her career if she got divorced. Mary Pickford once asked a journalist, Adela Rogers St. John's, "If I divorce Owen Moore to marry Douglas Fairbanks, will my public forgive me?" Adela Rogers St. John said to her, "I can't tell you for sure. but I think they will forgive you everything.
When they did marry, they were not only forgiven. In 1920, they went on a honeymoon that changed history. The couple traveled abroad and created the first celebrity feeding frenzy. 200,000 people came out to watch Mary and Doug stroll through London's Hyde Park.
And I'm amazed that the English lost control to the extent that they did in the Hyde Park thing. It's certainly a foretaste of what was to happen with the Beatles. They came too close, and she really got absolutely terrified. And Fairbanks had to pick her up out of the way, and you can see in the photograph that was taken at that moment the terror on her face.
They fled London, but there was more of the same in Paris, in Copenhagen, and later in post-revolutionary Moscow, where 300,000 people mobbed the ambassadors of the American dream. Silent films spoke to everyone.
Pickford's fame was unprecedented because there'd never been the technology to deal with it before. Suddenly there was a universal language, an Esperanto for the eyes, in which you could have a Pickford picture on Broadway 1 month, and it's being taken by mobile projectionists through Africa a month or two later.
Now everything they did was reported. Buying a new car or building a new home. It was all news. Pickford was intent on building up the reputation of movie actors. Their mansion, Pickfair, was designed to house a new breed of star.
And Pickford and Fairbanks became royalty for Hollywood. Lord Mountbatten acknowledged that Pickfair was like Buckingham Palace and was full of admiration for Pickford and Fairbanks. I find this faintly sad. She has to go on like this. But on the other hand, they brought a status to Hollywood which it previously did not have.
May I introduce myself? I'm Mr. Pickford.
Well, how do you do, Mr. Pickford?
And I'm Mr. Earhart.
How do you do, sir? What do you want?
We want lunch.
Where is it?
Amelia Earhart, Einstein, and H.G. Wells were among those who clamored for invitations to Pickfair. Mary Pickford had turned Hollywood into the most glamorous place on earth, but she never felt secure there. She feared that the audience that had given her everything could take it away just as quickly.
She knew that the public who had created her was working class and very poor, and she was going to throw her heart into the ring with them. Mary Pickford really was dramatizing her own fears on film. There's one movie called The Hoodlum in which she plays a spoiled, rich little teenager, really an insufferable brat on Park Avenue who goes to live in Lower Manhattan. When she goes to live in Lower Manhattan, she learns how to do the things that poor people do. Like have fun in a natural way, throw dice, use slang, wear crazy clothes. And in fact, she is cured by this experience. She's made whole. She becomes a lovely person because she becomes poor.
That didn't stop her drive to amass as much wealth as possible. Pickford wanted a cut of the huge distribution profits her films were generating. In 1919, she joined with Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith to become the first artists to be partners in a studio. The new venture, United Artists, inspired the famous Sam Goldwyn comment, "The lunatics have taken over the asylum." Lindsay Duran is the first female to head United Artists since Mary Pickford.
Oh, good. Okay. This has happened since then, too, where a group of artists get together, actors get together and say, we'll form a company, we'll figure this out. And within 20 minutes, there's tremendous infighting, there's tremendous, you promised you would do this and you didn't do it, I'm the one doing all the work around here. It's, like, it's a very, very classic struggle. Chaplin didn't make a movie for United Artists for a really long time. Griffith was off doing other things. They didn't get up every morning and say, what's good for United Artists, the way Mary Pickford did.
While the others were off making art, Mary Pickford knew United Artists needed money. So at 28, she made the saccharine sweet Pollyanna. Even she hated it, but her audience didn't.
That was Mary Pickford, the businesswoman, completely compromising Mary Pickford, the actress. She just sold out any ability to have variation in what she did in order to make sure that the money was coming in.
Pickford made a few classic films for United Artists. Suds is the story of an orphaned laundress who can't do anything right. There is no Prince Charming, no magical transformation, no happy ending. Pickford's mastery of pathos carries the whole film.
Before Chaplin had even started doing pathos, there was Mary Pickford. And there is a certain interplay between the films of Mary Pickford and the films of Charlie Chaplin, which are very instructive. And I do not take anything away from Chaplin, who was a genius, but then Pickford should be claimed a genius as well.
Despite all they had in common, the relationship between Pickford and Chaplin was uneasy. Chaplin was making his best films for other studios, and Pickford and United Artists weren't getting a penny.
They were business partners. Mary Pickford had a terrific head for business. Chaplin had an awful head for business, so he became her ball and chain in a business sense. It's very odd that two people who were so associated in the public mind, in effect, would rather not have known each other.
But they were up against the same challenge. The appetite for the down-at-the-heels characters that had made them famous was rapidly waning. By the mid-1920s, Hollywood had cemented its status as the world's glamour capital.
The big financiers were desperate to bring in the carriage trade. At the same time as self-censorship was coming in, the big picture palaces were going up, and you honestly couldn't go into a 3,000-seat theater, plush reaching up to your knees, and sit down and watch a picture about the slums.
New audiences wanted new stars. The talkies had arrived, and although they were technically unsophisticated, they were novel.
The talking picture demanded fresh names apart from anything else. And I have met silent stars who were hit by talkies at the age of 25 and never worked in pictures again.
Douglas Fairbanks saw the writing on the wall and fled. Pickford hoped he would return, but his claims of love came from increasingly distant locations. She was on her own for months at a time. Pickford made her last silent film in 1927. My Best Girl lacked the sociological bite of some of her earlier films, but it was full of biographical references, including a leading man who came to play an off-screen role in Pickford's life.
The cameraman told me that when she and Charles Buddy Rogers did the scene in the crate, he realized something was happening between them.
On screen, it was a wholesome love story. Pickford's audiences expected as much. They were older, and they clung to her for protection from the steamy romances taking over the screens.
I don't think it's sex pot. I think it is, I mean, look at her, what she's doing. She's touching him, she's gazing at him, she's saying, she's giving herself to him. But she's talking about muffins and pie. She wasn't dangerous like a Clarabelle or anything like that. She was someone you could take home and marry, you know. She wasn't someone you just slept with. She made pie.
By now, it was public knowledge that Douglas Fairbanks was involved with a society flapper. Mary no longer embodied the female ideal. And in My Best Girl, she acknowledges the competition.
In the teens, Mary's look was very hot. Now, Mary's look is getting old. People aren't used to it anymore. That's not what they want. They want the lipstick and the jazz babies and the music and the smoking and the cool. And she's not that at all, is she?
Pickford's contemporaries had nearly all disappeared from the screen. She had seen them destroyed, one by one.
It wasn't just talkies that killed the silence. Alcohol was one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse of Hollywood. But Mary Pickford stayed off the drink.
Even though she had more than her share of sorrows, her mother, her brother, and her sister had all died within a few years. Her world was changing dramatically, and once again she begged her audience to face it.
She only cut her hair after her mother died. I think she acted out her anger after her mother was safely in her grave. I think she acted out her anger against her husband, and she acted out anger against her public. When she cut her hair, it was front page news. She knew that she was shedding blood.
But Mary Pickford was trying to march with the times. At 37, she played a teenage debutante in Coquette, and for the first time, audiences heard this.
I'll tell you something I never told any other man ever. Just the way you are now, you'll be the best-looking man there. Now will you come?
No.
Well, you're the first man I ever told that to who just didn't naturally melt away.
I reckon I'm
Pickford's voice withstood the transition to talkies. Coquette won an Oscar and was a box office sensation. Everyone rushed to hear the Queen of the Silent speak. But once they experienced the novelty, they moved on. And the love of her life moved on too. Mary tried a last-minute reconciliation, but Fairbanks warned her he planned to remarry. 10 years of marriage ended with an exchange of telegrams.
What are your plans in London?
Oh? Traveling about, sightseeing, fun, vacation.
No romance?
Yes, a little.
Mary Pickford was the first serial bride in the history of Hollywood. In 1937, 4 years after divorcing Douglas Fairbanks, she married husband number 3, her My Best Girl co-star, Buddy Rogers. The couple adopted 2 children. Pickford had always played roles that mirrored her real life. But the audience was no longer interested in Pickford's real life.
Can you imagine if Mary Pickford had started to play mother roles? People associated her with childhood, their own childhood, and to see her age in front of them would have been too hurtful for their own vanity.
Pickford, too, had problems with the role of mother. Despite her vaunted love for children, her own babies were no substitute for the adoration of her fans. Her daughter is Roxanne Monroe.
I think she did have trouble with the reality of true love, understanding children for just the straight love that children give. She had trouble coping with stuff like that.
Having worked full-time since she was 8, Pickford could not suddenly become a stay-at-home mother. She continued as a producer for United Artists, but she had to redefine her public persona.
She realized she had to play a role in terms of being the great Mary Pickford post-movie star, but no one had really been a post-movie star before Mary Pickford. And I think she did that badly.
After a career of putting pompous authority figures in their places, the rebellious little girl became stiff and formal. Pickford had few role models for aging female figurehead.
It is my hope that my reign will be a happy, prosperous one.
Casting calls for ex-screen queens were scarce. So Pickford tried another career. Her new image was a hard sell. Malcolm Boyd, who became her best friend, tried to produce a radio broadcast for her.
I knew in about 30 seconds that this wasn't going to work. Mary was doing kind of Queen Victoria, and it was almost like, this is Mary Pickford. And so Mary said, how was it? And I said, I wiped the tape, dear. You know, she understood immediately. There was no question about it.
There was a positive side to Pickford's noblesse oblige. She believed it was her duty to do good.
You see, the world's been wonderful to me. People have been wonderful to me. The least I can do is to try to pay back in any way I can. In fact, it's awfully hard, you know. I'd like to be a Barbara Hutton. I'd like to have tremendous wealth that I could, because, you know, every charity deserves consideration. And I love the very young and the very old. But, of course, I'm relatively the poor little rich girl.
Pickford pushed the idea that film people should take care of their own. After D.W. Griffith and a number of her other silent colleagues died in poverty-stricken obscurity, she started the Motion Picture Home for the Aged. Pickford had a secret passion that made her generosity possible.
She owned a good portion of downtown Beverly Hills, a good portion of downtown Pasadena. She'd check on the buildings, and she kept up with it. It was not something that was publicized. Women just didn't do that.
And 30 years after she'd produced her first movie, they still weren't filmmakers either. Pickford remained a rarity when she traveled to Canada, the only place she was still considered royalty, to launch a film she'd produced.
Sleep, My Love was a pretty good picture. Unfortunately, she was frequently criticized as wanting too much power, getting in the way of the director and everyone else who were doing their business. It was very difficult for her not to rule, having once been the ruler.
Pickford was the last of the original partners to hang on at United Artists. She was edged out in 1942 by a group of businessmen who no longer wanted her input. Mary now had a lot of time on her hands. Malcolm Boyd, a frequent visitor at Pickfair, witnessed Mary succumb to the disease that had destroyed many of her friends and family.
Her drinking problem wasn't what you had before dinner or at the table, but Mary would always slip away or escape. I mean, I'm going to the ladies' room or, you know, somewhere. But then she'd come back and be out of it, be gone. One night, Mary hadn't come back, and we searched everywhere. Finally, in the guest house, there she was in taffeta, and her little body just collapsed on the floor, and she was out.
With her career behind her, and little but the bottle to help her pass her days, Mary Pickford rarely ventured outside the grounds of her home.
Oh, she got perturbed with me quite a bit when I told her it was like being in a gilded cage. She just more or less locked herself away. I think Pickfair became her castle. It represented the good times, everything that had been there before.
There's something very poignant about Mary later. I remember once some women from some kind of, I don't know, a club that visits celebrities' homes, you know, kind of moneyed, bored women. And they're down at the bottom of the spiral staircase. And she comes down the spiral staircase because this is her only performance now. And you hear a woman, Mary, we love you, Mary. And they start applauding, and this is her scene. And I found that absolutely tragic.
Pickford felt she'd become a relic, that her films were best left to slowly rot. But she also feared looking quaint and ridiculous compared to the bombshells of the day, and so she threatened to burn all her work.
This was a gesture hoping for an outcry. I don't think she got quite as strong an outcry as she wanted, because by that time people thought, well, so what?
I think she felt she was a victim in being betrayed by the public that she had given everything to, and all they gave her was a few lousy bucks and a house on a hill.
This is the face of Mary Pickford.
In 1972, Mary Pickford was given an Oscar for Lifetime Achievement. Pickford was so infirm that the Academy had to film her acceptance speech at her home.
Mary, I present this to you with great pride and with the love and admiration of the whole Academy.
That's wonderful. I think it was a repulsive event. They made references to Mary Pickford being America's sweetheart, and what a lovely, sweet rose she was. What an adorable little creature. They did not recognize her central contributions to the history of film. They did not recognize that she was one of the founders of the entire Hollywood film industry. They didn't even reflect what she did as an artist. Supposedly that is what Oscars are given for. I think to give someone an Oscar for being a symbol of nostalgia is an insult.
There were, in the end, no fitting tributes to Pickford. But before she died in 1979 at age 87, she told Kevin Brownlow she'd had a private moment of pride.
Somebody made her look at suds, and she was really surprised at how good she was and how good it was, and that gave her the incentive to begin to save the films.
But many Pickford films were already disintegrating from neglect. Elena Archer and her colleagues are trying to restore the prince as fast as they can, before it's too late.
This is one of the most beautiful scenes in silent film, I think. It's so full of love, and it seems unrehearsed. And she's so youthful and so happy in this scene. She doesn't even notice the rain. It's one of those great moments in cinema. Everything about it is so alive.
Pickford's films are finally finding their way to theaters. Most audiences are unaware of her pioneering life story. People are here because 100 years after she began her career, Mary Pickford still has the power to entertain.
No matter how much money Mary made, this rich queen of Hollywood, Mary Pickford, and the jewels and the furs and the trips to Europe, this is where she came from. This is who she really was.